This video will continue the story of the Ottoman-Portuguese Wars, not by moving forward chronologically, but by moving west to the equally crucial East African theatre. As both empires found themselves heavily reliant on local alliances to project power into crucial regions, the devastating conflict between the Kingdom of Ethiopia and the Sultanate of Adal would become part of the two empires' widening rivalry. Thought to be the birthplace of the human species and the center of one of antiquity's great empires, the history of Ethiopia is long and storied. When the exploring Portuguese first made landfall in the diminished Kingdom of Ethiopia, or Abyssinia, during their early forays into the Indian Ocean, it seemed to them an exotic hermit kingdom hidden from the world and from the passage of time. To them, this was a devoutly Christian kingdom, ruled by the Crusade-era legend of Prester John, surrounded by coastal Muslim states and pastoral tribes. The Prester John myth held powerful sway over Europe for a century or more, with official papal envoys even being sent to find and coordinate with the elusive emperor. There were, of course, many differences in reality. For one, Ethiopia was anything but a hermit kingdom. Under the Empire of Aksum, which Christianized only shortly after Rome in 330 AD, Ethiopians traded and clashed with Rome and Persia as a near equal, even dominating the southern areas of Arabia for long stretches of time. Though Indian Ocean trade had become a largely Islamic enterprise during the conversion of the coastal regions, with Muslim traders and dynasties establishing themselves as far south as Zanzibar by riding the reliable monsoon winds, Ethiopia remained closely connected to the wider Indian Ocean. Though rival sultanates rose and fell among the Somalis, none were able to create a single state to unify the coastal regions, leaving them to generally accept Ethiopian suzerainty. Muslim merchants ruled the waves during the 15th century, but tributes and taxes poured into the coffers of the Negus, and Ethiopia's slaves and ivory flowed unabated to markets in Egypt and India. An Ethiopian delegation had even attended the Council of Florence in 1441, where they were excitedly welcomed as subjects of Prester John, despite their every assertion that their Negus, or emperor, was called Czare-Jakob and bore no such title. The years just prior to the Ottoman entry into the Indian Ocean had not been kind to Ethiopia, however. Throughout the 14th century, the nearest thing to a Muslim rival to the empire had been the Sultanate of Ifat under the Walasma dynasty, a disunified state ruling over a coastal merchant elite often loyal to the Ethiopian Negus, and a pastoralist semi-nomadic population generally unconcerned with the borders or conflicts of the two states. An attempt by Sultan Sabreddin to invade Ethiopia in 1332 led the warrior king Amda-Seyon to sack and conquer most of Ifat. Further conflict in the following decades led to the Sultanate's destruction by Amda-Seyon's grandson Dawit in 1403. But from its ashes would emerge a far more formidable foe. As Ifat crumbled, the Walasma dynasty split in two. Some of the ruling family opted to remain in the former lands of Ifat, retaining some wealth and influence. The more militant branches of the family headed east to found the Sultanate of Adal, centered in Harar. In the century that followed, succession crises and weak monarchs would weaken Ethiopia's hold over both its coastal Muslim tributaries and the increasingly powerful Christian feudal nobility at home, while Adal prospered from trade and bolstered its military might through the conversion of Afar and Somali pastoralists to Islam. Still, in 1516, Ethiopia remained strong, and with the aid of a Portuguese fleet, Negus-Lebna Dengel scored a significant victory against Adal, killing its Sultan Mahfuz and even burning Ifat's old capital of Zela. Chroniclers triumphantly declared the Muslim threat ended forever. but the following years would change everything. In 1517, Selim the Grim conquered Egypt and gained his first foothold in the Indian Ocean. Adal would be quick to forge ties with this powerful new neighbour, allowing for the acquisition of modern armaments Ethiopia largely lacked. The Ottomans, for their part, saw Adal as a useful ally, given the partial Portuguese blockade of the Red Sea. The succession crisis sparked by the death of Mahfuz led to the usurpation of the state by the former soldier Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim in 1520. Despite never claiming the title of the Sultan, Ahmad, called Greny for his left-handedness, was militant and visionary, who intended to overthrow the Solomonic Empire by conquest, positioning himself as the Negus of a Muslim Ethiopia. In 1529, he launched his first forays into the Ethiopian highlands, challenging Lebna Dengel and sparking a war that would outlive them both. The first encounter between the two kings was a decisive victory for Greny. Bolstered by Ottoman-manufactured firearms, and possibly even a contingent of Ottoman troops, Greny inflicted heavy casualties on the larger Ethiopian army before driving it from the swampy field in the Battle of Simbra-Kure. Such a dramatic victory, a mere 50 kilometers east of today's Addis Ababa, threw the empire into disarray, and after a brief period of consolidation, Greny pushed northwards, easily overthrowing Ethiopian power in the largely Muslim regions of Shewa and Amhara. He granted long-suppressed local elites the authority they had lost under Ethiopian rule, effectively integrating new territory as fast as his armies could conquer it. Further confrontations would solidify Adal's advantage over the crumbling Ethiopian army. General Wasan Sagad, tasked with guarding the eastern and southern provinces in the wake of Lebna Dengel's withdrawal, was killed in battle at Mount Busat in 1531, while other Ethiopian armies broke and scattered before the shock and awe created by the unfamiliar cannons. During the second battle between Greny and Lebna Dengel at the fortress of Ambosel near the Bashalo River, Lebna Dengel was almost captured by the victorious Imam, while his army routed around him. By the end of 1531, only the fortified Central Highlands remained securely Ethiopian. The once great warrior king of Ethiopia was a virtual prisoner in the innermost regions of his empire, with the Adalites dominant as far west as Lake Tana. In the more Christian-dominated areas, stiffer resistance was put up to Greny's advance. Axum represented a major prize for Greny, being the seat of the first great Ethiopian empire, a legacy Greny wished to invoke in a close echo to the Ottomans' own claims of successorship to the Roman Empire. Yet here, a few Turkish Christian converts had furnished the Ethiopian defenders with firearms of their own. Though Axum would fall with the rest of the Tigray region after a difficult siege, with Greny destroying the Church of Mary of Zion in punishment for its stiff resistance, it did check his advance until 1533. The degree of direct Ottoman support Greny received in the earlier years of his campaign is rather unclear, highlighting another failing of the Portuguese chroniclers that otherwise provide a remarkably detailed account of the conflict. Nevertheless, the devastating impact of Ottoman-made arms is undeniable in the rapid collapse of the Horn of Africa's strongest power. Lebna Dengel was helpless to oppose Greny, and after the fall of the royal compound of Ambergeshen, spent the last years of his life an effective fugitive within his own realm. Alongside the widespread fighting, famine ravaged the highlands, cut off from crop tributes and subject to frequent raiding. But all was not lost for the Solomonic kingdom, and the following years would see a new force enter the fray, countering the Ottoman support. In 1535, with his own armies on the run, The vanquished emperor had sent an appeal for aid to the King of Portugal. Portuguese aid would not arrive within his lifetime, but the call for help he sent may well have saved his dynasty. Not long after the ascension of his son Golodjuos, 400 Portuguese musketmen, along with numerous craftsmen and gunsmiths, arrived in Massawa in February of 1541, where they were joined by small contingents of loyal Ethiopian warriors. Sebla-Wangel, Queen Mother of Ethiopia, served as their guide and attaché as they marched out in hopes of joining their force to that of Golodjuos. Pushing into the Tigray region, they won a number of decisive battles, despite the greatly superior numbers of the Adalite garrisons. Gren himself was injured during an utter rout at Jata, leading Cristoval's chronicler, Miguel de Castañoso, to declare that with 100 horses to pursue with, the whole threat of Adal might have been ended. However, the rainy season slowed Kristavo's advance into Tigray considerably, and a number of Adalite-held fortresses still stood between him and Golodjuos. And while the local populace largely supported Kristavo as a fellow Christian, Adalite forces in the region remained an ever-present threat. By 1542, the broader Ottoman-Portuguese War was at its height. The defeat at Diu had been just 4 years earlier, with the Ottoman fleet still at large as Sultan Suleiman searched for new ways to undermine his Portuguese rivals. Thus, when Ahmad Gren's call for help brought news of the Portuguese presence in Ethiopia to Suleiman's attention, the Adal War became a new front against a major rival. Determined not to allow Portuguese-backed Ethiopia to gain a presence in the Gulf of Aden and block off the Red Sea again, and hoping to stamp out the tenacious Christian kingdom entirely, Suleiman authorized a sizable expedition to enter the war on the Adalite side. From Zabid in Yemen, 900 Turkish and 2,000 Arab soldiers embarked across the Red Sea to aid their African ally. When Kristavo returned to Wufla in August 1542, fresh off his victory seizing Ambosel back from the Adalites to open the path to Golodjuos, he was unwittingly walking into the jaws of the much larger Ottoman Adalite force. On August 28th, the Portuguese expedition was shattered in the Battle of Wufla. Some 120 Portuguese managed to escape the slaughter, fleeing with Sebla-Wangel, while the rest either fell in battle or became prisoners of the Sultan. Kristavo was among the captured, though he would not live long in Ahmad Gren's custody. After 13 years of war, with the Portuguese defeated, Ahmad Gren seems to have concluded that at this point his victory was complete. To an outside observer, this conclusion might have seemed a safe one, but Gren's assumption that the remaining Portuguese had simply scattered was incorrect. The 120 soldiers left of the expedition had in fact retreated back through Ambosel to join up with Golodjuos. As their excess supplies and powder had been safely stored in Ambosel when Kristavo met with disaster in Wufla, they were able to arm and train numerous Ethiopians to fight as musketmen. Several long months were spent in training and preparation, with the first Ethiopian-made muskets and gunpowder being produced to further narrow the advantage in arms and numbers held by the Adalites. Finally, on February 6, 1543, Golodjuos marched out for Lake Tana at the head of his new combined army. Lebna Dengel's army had been unprepared for gunpowder warfare, and Kristavo's had been small and unfamiliar with the landscape. But Golodjuos's combined the strengths of both into something far greater. On February 21st, his army met the Adalites in what would be the deciding battle of the war. Though outnumbered, they took Ahmad Gren and his forces by surprise, secure as the Adalites were in their victory. Accounts of the battle are unfortunately somewhat questionable, most significantly the numbers of soldiers involved, with the chronicle claiming 9,000 Ethiopians, against 15,000 Adalites. As the Ethiopian monarchy had only just a few years earlier been effectively exiles, it seems unlikely they could have so rapidly mobilized an army larger than the army Lebna Dengel had drawn from the whole of a unified Ethiopia. And as the Adalites were not on active campaign when they met Golodios at Lake Tana, well within what they considered safely subdued territory, it is equally unlikely that Granye would have the entirety of his forces mobilized. Most of the warriors he had relied upon during his conquests were pastoralist tribes, which would have returned to their lands and herds with the plunder of the previous year's victories. But even if the numbers are exaggerated, the significance of the battle's outcome can hardly be overstated. The Adalites fought bravely and competently despite the disarray the Ethiopians had caught them in, buoyed up as they were by the skilled Ottoman and Yemeni gunners and by their own years of hard-won experience. But the addition of gunnery to the Ethiopian army would doom the Adalite campaign. Ahmad Gran found his position the target of concentrated volleys of musket fire. Soon enough, a bullet found its way through the Adalite lines to the intended target of the barrage, killing the Imam and shattering Adalite morale. Another tradition holds that their surprise and disorganization allowed for a single Portuguese musketeer to rush a gap in their lines, reaching Ahmad Granye himself as he shouted orders over the deafening musket fire. Mere moments later, both fell, mortally wounded, the musketeer having shot Granye through the breast before being set upon by the surrounding Adalite soldiers. This heroic account is not related by Castanhosa and is likely a fabrication, but however the Imam's death came to be, its impact on his forces was the same. The past 14 years of war had been the product of one man's vision. The shock of his death broke the morale of the Adalites, and in a remarkably close echo to the Portuguese flight after Kristava's death, the remnants of the Turkish and Yemeni force fled back to the coast of Adel with Gran's widow, Betty del Wembara. On the battlefield they left behind, Gran's body was beheaded, with the grisly trophy displayed to all surrounding countryside to spread word of the great conqueror's passing. The war would drag on for 5 years further, with Adel under the control of Gran's nephew, Nur ibn Mujahid, due to his son's capture by the Portuguese, though Gran's death had largely ended the existential threat Adel posed to Ethiopia. Though Adel retained much of its strong army, Nur failed to inspire the same dread or loyalty his uncle had, leading to a gradual Ethiopian reclamation of the lost territories. Nur's legacy would not be in the form of conquest, but in the construction of Harar's impressive and still standing walls. Soon, the war turned to stalemate, and then to peace between the two bloodied and exhausted powers. Adal retained dominion over the coast and freedom from the tributes a stronger Ethiopia had levied on the coastal Muslim states in ages past, making the war a victory from the Ottoman perspective. Though Ethiopia would retain its ties to Portugal, it would not play any major role in combating the Ottomans in the Indian Ocean without proper coastal access. But from the perspective of Adel, and especially Ethiopia, the war had been catastrophically destructive. The following decades would see a new force emerge to challenge both states in the form of migrating Oromo tribes, with the battered and exhausted nations helpless to combat their advance. Nur's great walls would be put to the test not by the Ethiopians they had been built to ward off, but by the Oromo, shortly before the Sultanate's collapse in 1577.